aim, shoot, and escape. It all happens in an instant for the Ukrainian snipers who have become the nightmare of the Kremlin troops. While Vladimir Putin's elements have achieved incredible victories during their invasion, the truth is that the snipers of the local resistance have been a constant torture for them. From the ruins of a building or behind the undergrowth in a cold forest, these silent hunters have riddled hundreds of Russians. In this new installment of Military Force, we propose you to join these secret teams to experience firsthand how a sniper works and what it feels like to blow an opponent's brains out. Without further ado, put on your bulletproof vest and let's begin with this installment. During the war in Ukraine, we have seen the development of new technologies and the retirement of tactics that have already become obsolete. However, to the surprise of many analysts, there is one role that remains important, that of snipers. These patient soldiers who open fire on the enemy from a hidden position, causing the maximum number of casualties possible without exposing themselves. This is especially useful when fighting takes place in urban areas that have a wide range of places to hide. Whether it be homes, buildings, shops, or any type of structure, there the Ukrainian snipers have found an ideal space to annihilate the enemy. What you are seeing on screen is a video recorded by a Kiev operator who waits silently among the rubble of a ruined building. We can see the platform used to take the lives of the Russian enemies, a rifle that appears to be an AR-15 type. There are two striking elements. On the one hand, the machine gun placed on one side, supported by a tripod. Evidently, this attack was carried out by a team, although only the sniper's record remains. On the other hand, the small slit through which the sniper must shoot shows that precision is everything. After firing a few shots, which resounded with a sound as spectacular as it was threatening, the sniper decided to change position. In this way, we can see firsthand how destroyed the structure where this Ukrainian soldier is hiding is. The space is completely destroyed. Parts of the wall and ceiling are about to fall off. The stairs are full of dust and marks of combat. The building is a ghost space that seems to be uninhabited, but that does not mean that we should let our guard down. Faced with potential danger, the Kiev sniper stopped in the doorway and used his own arm to steady the aim of his rifle. A primitive and old tactic, but no less precise for that. From outside, distant rumblings and soft sounds of combat can be heard. The soldier goes on alert and prepares to take down any nearby threat. It is in these moments of complete solitude that composure, ability, and training come into play. The sniper knows that the only thing that separates him from death is his rifle and his ability to use it correctly, with deadly precision. Each step must be taken carefully, knowing that crossing open terrain or showing himself through a window could put him in the sight of an enemy sniper. In this case, the recorded material only allows us to see the defensive strategies of the sniper, who remained hidden in that pile of rubble, which was once a building. The Ukrainian sniper program was not always equally powerful and effective. It is a fortress that was built over time, and that was shaped by the need to implement this type of offensive in highly important territories. Although at the beginning of the conflict the sniper teams had no experience, they made up for those shortcomings with confidence and a lot of courage. In this way, they became a crucial piece in the counteroffensives of Volodymyr Zelensky's government. Initially, the primary mission of the snipers was reconnaissance, that is, placing themselves in privileged places to be able to see the enemy's activity and report it to their colleagues. Over time, this changed to adjust to Ukraine's operational needs. Now, the main value is to shoot down high-priority targets. Each cartridge is expensive, and opening fire also implies revealing the position, which is why the snipers only pull the trigger when the prey justifies it. The order is to kill commanders, sergeants, and high-ranking officers who are part of the mission planning. These are losses that are always painful for the rival, since they reduce their tactical capacity. The deaths of ordinary soldiers do not carry the same weight. Russia has hundreds of thousands of troops. Killing a handful of them would not have any negative effect. Next, we will see another sniper activity, but this time recorded from the point of view of a fellow soldier who watches as the sniper annihilates Russians in the city of Optine. The man who is waiting still, observing through the telescopic sight, is not a Ukrainian soldier, but a Chechen volunteer member of the Sheikh Mansour battalion. Later, we will tell you what this unit is about, but first, let's see it in action. Two shots, two deaths. That is the balance that every sniper seeks. As we anticipated, the sniper was part of the Sheikh Mansour battalion, one of the many Chechen armed militias made up of volunteers who joined the war between Russia and Ukraine as allies of Kiev. The unit was named in honor of a Chechen military commander and Islamic leader who fought against the expansion of the Russian Empire in the Caucasus region during the 18th century. This gives an indication that hatred and tensions between these peoples are nothing new, rather the opposite. They are ancestral rivalries that find their way to the present through modern interests that hide old grudges. The Sheikh Mansour battalion has been active since the first stage, which began in 2014, and which later led to the invasion of the Kremlin troops into Ukrainian territory. This means that they have been fighting in Europe for a decade now, which is why their snipers have great tactical ability and are completely familiar with the contexts and weapons used. Although most are volunteers who joined spontaneously, that does not mean that they do not have concrete experience. In fact, almost all of them are veterans of the Chechen wars of the 1990s, so they know the Russian troops and their strategies very well. Because of this, they have been an invaluable support for Kyiv. Perhaps the most notable characteristic of this battalion is that they refuse to be part of the International Legion, nor to receive salaries or support from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. They operate on their own without following rules or receiving orders. Their support for Zelensky is motivated entirely by their hatred of the Russians, following the famous Arabic saying that dictates, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." Let us return to the operations of those two soldiers who were hidden in the depths of Opytna in the Donetsk Oblast.
Снимаемся. Минус 2. РПГ, водос. Уходят.
As we anticipated, shooting is not a decision to be taken lightly. The sound and sight of your rifle will reveal your position. You must be sure that pulling the trigger is worth it. In this case, the shooters were discovered and had to flee from their hiding place immediately so as not to be annihilated by the Russian troops. The life of a sniper is like that, from calm and absolute silence to the madness of fleeing before hundreds of rivals arrive to annihilate you. Usually, snipers active in Ukraine record all their activities, both to keep an accurate count of their casualties and to add material to the propaganda campaign of the Zelensky government. That is why experts claim that snipers have a dual role in the war in Ukraine. On the one hand, they are a lethal tool to eliminate high-importance targets, such as officers and commanders. On the other hand, their presence has a devastating psychological effect, striking fear into the hearts of Russian soldiers. Knowing that there are thousands of assassins hiding out, waiting for the right moment to gun them down, is a breeding ground for paranoia. Among all the Ukrainian cities that have been the scene of brutal fighting, there is one that stands out above the rest due to the level of violence it experienced. We are talking about Bakhmut, a land of nightmares where Kyiv snipers had a very hard task. Now we find ourselves in the point of view of a sniper located in an abandoned building. The man was there trying to protect his companions in the middle of the campaign to retake Bakhmut, which triggered hand-to-hand combat and a brutal number of deaths on both sides. The operator covered his rifle with a rag, perhaps to camouflage the platform, although when using such a large weapon, it is difficult for it to go unnoticed by the eyes of the rival. Suddenly, a loud bang served as the first warning of what was to come.
Там у меня есть карта. Из-за группы деревьев оттуда здесь красный огонек вылетел.
In the background, a thunderous noise and the sound of automatic gunfire could be heard. While such symphonies are common in the midst of a war, the proximity was worrying and alerted the entire team that the Russians were approaching. Still, they would never have expected what happened next.
Ой, блядь. Спалились, сука. Пидорас.
A shot hit just a few centimeters from the Ukrainian operator. Someone had seen him, but he didn't have the precision to take him down. When a rifle cartridge passes so close to your body, the response depends entirely on your training and your courage. That experience can paralyze you or activate survival mode to immediately flee the scene. The latter is what the sniper did, who moved away from any window or door from which he could be seen by the stealthy rival. Again, the camera carried by this soldier allows us to enter one of the many homes completely destroyed by the war. It is a vision as dark as it is depressing. These spaces used to be homes and workspaces. Now, they are skeletons of concrete and wood on the verge of collapse. The operator crossed the remains trying to find a new suitable place to place his equipment and continue with his work as a sniper. Let's listen to the soundtrack of this scene. With explosions and gunfire in the background, the sniper continued to advance in that destroyed house. There is a point at which men must stop being afraid of those noises. You cannot hesitate. You must continue marching even if the explosions and the cartridges come closer. The only intelligent response is to evaluate the options and act accordingly, but that hellish sound cannot freeze a soldier's survival instincts. Finally, the operator found an ideal position in a ruined room. The main window had an interesting advantage to hide there and eliminate some Russians, but first, it was necessary to prepare the place. Once that primitive camouflage composed of a simple household curtain was ready, the sniper got into position to wait for the right moment to pull the trigger. Although the shot is not too prodigious and the curtain covers a large part of the visual field, it is still striking to hear the shots fired by the Ukrainian soldier. Remember that this mission was carried out in Bakhmut, a city devastated by the worst fighting of the entire conflict. A mix of the brutality of the trenches of the First World War, the massiveness of the Second World War, and the modern technology of the latest conflicts. Unlike other similar files, it is notable how this sniper began shooting with pauses, aiming carefully and then opening fire more frequently, almost as if it were an assault rifle. The last video that we will analyze in this installment has a notable curiosity that separates it from the rest of the files. Generally, the records of this war take place in contexts of destruction, with spaces devastated by the fury of the conflict. While this is shocking, it is even more shocking to see soldiers with huge rifles shooting from the living room of a well-maintained house, a space in which, until a few months ago, a family lived. The contrast is brutal. A flowered armchair, a wooden desk, and on top of it, a Soviet KSVK rifle with a 12.7mm caliber, a beast capable of penetrating metal, concrete, and all kinds of solid materials. Usually, these types of weapons are not used to eliminate other people, since the energy released is too great and the result is a shattered body, an image that is too grotesque. The main role of these platforms is to destroy radars, telephones, vehicle engines, and other medium or low armor units. Even so, in a war, there are no unbreakable rules. On more than one occasion, the power of the KSVK has been used to take down human targets. The role of the sniper remains one of the strangest and most complex. He must combine patience and calm, with cold blood to pull the trigger at the precise moment so that the shot ends a life. As you can see, the efforts of the Ukrainian snipers have been fundamental to the local resistance, as they not only managed to contain and eliminate the enemy's advance, but also instilled terror in the hearts of their rivals. Beyond their important victories, the Kremlin troops live with the worry of being in the sights of a Ukrainian sniper, knowing that the next step they take may be the last of their lives.
This, like for all soldiers, is their life now. Ukraine or death.
Gunshots, screams, bombs, bangs, and a lot of blood. That's what life is all about when war suddenly takes over a territory and shakes it to the core. In the delicate and raw fragment we have just seen, we can witness how the clashes between Ukraine and Russia have affected the daily life of the KFORIKI, a group of soldiers who make up a unique category of the Ukrainian militia's air assault forces. And they are the ones who lived through their worst nightmare firsthand. In today's report, we will witness a mission that this group had to face, and it did not end very well. Because, attacked by the Russian army, surrounded and with no way out, the KFORIKI were forced to fight a bloody battle of more than 14 hours, where they fought hand-to-hand for territorial position, the recovery of land, and of course, their lives, and those of thousands of Ukrainian civilians. Welcome to this new episode where we will witness a true war miracle. Let's begin. June 2024. It's been 2 years since Russia and Ukraine have been fighting hand-to-hand. This invasion, initiated by the Russians on Ukrainian soil, began on February 24, 2022, and constitutes the biggest escalation in the struggle for land and independence in Vladimir Zelensky's country. These events followed the Euromaidan in 2014, with a series of Ukrainian independence and nationalist demonstrations and riots. These began on November 21, 2013 in Kyiv's Independence Square, where large protests sedimented a unique Ukrainian patriotism. And that's where the seeds of the warriors began to germinate. In 2014, former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych made the sudden decision to suspend the association agreement between the European Union and Ukraine, and instead strengthen ties with Russia and the Eurasian Economic Union. Behind this decision, there was a strong pressure from Vladimir Putin, which provoked a host of complaints from Ukrainian compatriots who opposed what they considered widespread government corruption, abuse of power, and human rights violations. They longed to keep their homeland independent, without the need to maintain a link with Russia. Hence, the current clashes have such an impact on the lives of simple citizens willing to leave everything for an independent Ukraine, such as the aforementioned KFORIKI group. These men are part of a unit of Ukrainian soldiers willing to die for their beloved country. But they are not just a group of brave warriors, but they have a powerful motivation. They fight to defend their territory with tooth and claw. This common objective united them with a sense of loyalty and belonging to the group, which almost makes them a true family. Next, we will hear Sova, a commander of the KFORIKI, explain in his own voice what his mission is.
Since we've been stationed here, we've been holding the line, supporting nearby brigades, doing recon, and bracing ourselves for an enemy attack. I expect it'll come early morning, or when it's dark, or maybe during bad weather. No matter when it happens, we'll give them everything we've got.
As for the previous life of these men, it can be said that it was far from the trenches, as they are not what one would expect from a typical Ukrainian frontline soldier. Let's meet the unstereotypical members of this unit. They are Sova, Punk, Morchak, and Albert. Sova is an artist and tattoo artist from Kiev, whose real name is Roma and who is officially a commander. Punk lives up to his name, as he is of course a fan of that style of music. Morchuk used to be a sailor and a navigator of Nordic waters. And finally, Albert, who used to work as an IT person. That is, he was the person in charge of creating and managing computer and technological systems. As you can see, none of them had military training. However, the fact of wanting to defend their lands and achieve Ukrainian liberation and independence from Vladimir Putin and his men has encouraged them to put on their military equipment and go to the front line with every weapon they have. After all, the last thing to be lost is hope. They are family. They belong to each other. What's more, they consider themselves to be rebels willing to kill or die for a flag, a land and a people that represents them. They are part of the Kaifariki, soldiers of unique and varied origins who love Ukraine to the core. Here we will see how Punk explains the tactics of the weapons they have, their uses and logistics, but also their setbacks.
An assault rifle isn't much use against anything other than infantry. With the PKM, you can at least engage lightly armored vehicles. Maybe even try to penetrate the rear of a BMP. We've got armor-piercing rounds we captured from the Russians for BMPs, BRDMs, but they won't stop a tank.
We are left with this last sentence: you cannot stop the tanks. It is very important to understand how this group of men, so lethally prepared, could have been crossed by the adversities that we are going to see. The Kaifariki take refuge under a plot of land with an old underground structure covered with cloth and that functions as a home and containment for each of the soldiers. This is position number 1, the shelter. Now the second is the yard, an intermediate terrain where there is a kind of shelter, but which also serves as a runway between the village and its backup places. This is where they take cover behind enemy lines. However, these shelters are not made of steel, so they are easily permeable to enemy attacks. And in fact, it made them an easy target within the vicinity of the village that the Kaifariki wanted to recover. One cold night, this group of soldiers armed to the teeth went out to hunt Russian enemies while the unit of the Black Sea Defense Group, or BSDG, for its acronym in English, stayed in the shelter, the number 1 post, as a backup force. Meanwhile, the Kaifariki ran in the dark, advancing towards the enemy, stalking like predators their prey. At 4 in the morning, the terrifying sounds of the bombs began to roar. The walls of the shelter trembled. The entire structure began to. The ground beneath them began to shake, as did the ground beneath them, which slowly filled with water. But that was only a brief prelude. The trouble had only just begun. One of the soldiers of the Black Sea Defense Group, Gaba, received a radio call from Sova with a message urging them into action. The tanks were on their way.
Нужна твоя поддержка, нужна твоя поддержка.
Плюс. Куда поддержка? Куда?
Нужна поддержка в плане противотанковых. Нужна поддержка в плане противотанковых.
In this very fragment, the fear of an attack became a tangible reality. The confrontation was imminent. The enemy troops were arriving with heavy artillery, and they, the Kaifariki, could not hold them off for long. After the call for help, Sova left a clear message to the BSDG soldiers. The enemy troops were coming to attack brutally. Thus, the Kaifariki were hit hard by storms, a type of assault on Russian convoys carried out on the ground to carry out and lower the heads of enemy soldiers. No one was safe. Therefore, while Sova's team tried at all costs to resist the arrival of the tanks, Gaba and his team prepared an RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade. Equipped with all this, the BSDG went out to hunt Russian enemies in order to help and rescue their friends, the Kaifariki. In the following fragment, you will be able to witness this terrible confrontation. Everything was chaos. In the absolute solitude of the night, these men went out to face their powerful enemies with only one objective: to reach the next combat position and help their comrades. Despite the fact that they were running out of ammunition and the disadvantage that this implied, Gaba and his men went out with courage, moved by that impulse, and started firing.
Last hope.
With little ammunition but a lot of will, the BSDG group managed to meet up with Sova and his men in combat. Together and more than brothers, these soldiers set out to hunt down the Russian enemies. The only way out of this situation was through open terrain where the crossfire would be the brutal protagonist. Screams, insults, confusion, and darkness. This was the setting for the hard night they would have to face. Next, we will see the precise moment when these men give one last great fight to their enemies.
Малыш, малыш, сова. Малыш, малыш. Сюда. Малыш, малыш.
The fight never had a moment of rest, neither did the men, and each fought a battle like no other. In this clip, we'll see how Punk started the shooting while Sova took his grenade, and with strategy began a powerful counteroffensive.
У меня легкая в руку, сова. Легкая.
Then he's injured.
Все будет хорошо, пацаны. Я вас люблю.
Despite the physical consequences, there was a fighting spirit that was never lost. They were brothers in war. After several hours of this battle in front of enemy lines, the day came, and what was previously hidden now became clear and evident. Each of the Ukrainian soldiers, with admirable calm, knew how to understand the game of war and planned their survival strategies. By morning, the shots and grenades had decreased considerably, and while a leader looked after the rear, the other warriors could rest, hydrate, reflect on the steps to follow, and rearm themselves. Only one of the men was wounded. He had lost his hearing because of the incessant roar of the bombings, but even so, his head had to be cool because they still had one more feat to accomplish. Behind enemy lines, 3 tanks and various threats were approaching, and when everything seemed to be calm, a burst of gas surrounded them, anticipating what would come next. A more severe attack and certainly much worse. This was not over. By mid-morning and covered under El Refugio or La Yarda, hiding places 1 and 2 respectively, the Keifariki and the BSDG had to activate their defense lines, and thus be able to fight their Russian enemies who with tanks were ready to go for everything. So much so that they had blocked the roads to position themselves in front of the Ukrainian soldiers and thus enclosed them more and more, without remorse or mercy. Now, shielded on the same ground of 2 opposing houses, the Russians and Ukrainians fought in a shootout like no other. And while the Keifariki and the BSDG tried to coordinate drone units and call for reinforcements by radio, no soldier was nearby to come to their aid. However, after a tough battle where bullets and ammunition were heard until exhaustion, a friendly unit with a battle drone dropped an explosive that fell on the Russian lines. Thus, their enemies began to fall, wounded and without strength. The Ukrainian counterattack had been successful, but it did not mean the end of the battle. The Russians continued to outgun them. The tension increased, and while some soldiers were hurt, others were ready for the fiercest of reprisals. In this clip, we will see the last call for help that Gaba requested.
Есть дохуя пидоров, перекличку, сука, делают. Ебаните в нас, кто слышит.
Gaba sends a final call for help over the radio.
The Russian soldiers were attacking hard, and Gaba and his men had nowhere to run. But hope was not lost. This last call for help had been heard, and the cavalry had landed. More Ukrainian soldiers arrived with heavy artillery, drones, mortars, and rocket launchers. Reinforcements had arrived from behind the uninhabited and vacant lands, ready to fight any Russian shooter they found in their path. The defense was grandiloquent, and the aerial images of the sky mined with rockets were unparalleled. After a hard attack, the village and everything around it was devastated by the incessant flare of rockets that mined the sky. Thus, Gaba and his men were able to go out and counterattack the Russian soldiers with what they had left: little ammunition, but a lot of thirst for enemy blood. Punk had been wounded after an explosion when he was enveloped in a cloud of dust and shrapnel. However, their transfer was successful. Anyway, at the shelter and already nearing nightfall, the fire began to stalk the house where they were staying, and by sunset, the K4EK and the BSDG were forced to go out and run for their lives. There were no enemies in sight, only fire and darkness. All thanks to the support of 2 other soldiers who had managed to block and kill the Russians. Once they found shelter, they managed to understand that they had just survived an unprecedented attack in the history of the Ukrainian militia. Although the tough fighting lasted 14 long hours, the rescues were possible thanks to the reinforcements and heavy artillery of these rebellious soldiers. They, more than anyone else, carried the weight of the weapons on their shoulders. Thus, the K4EK and BSDG, whose dreams, now more than ever, are of war and pride for the Ukrainian motherland, became legends. This is how we come to the end of the report. If you like our content, please give it a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to keep up to date with our stories. This is Military Force. Thank you so much for joining us. See you next time.